What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 191 of the Stand Up Guys podcast. I'm your host, the incomparable Zach Jones, and this week I'll be reviewing the latest episode of Star Wars: The Acolyte. That would be episode 6. Now, I do have to apologize. I went to record a review of episode 5 last week, and I had nothing but technical issues. I don't know if you guys have ever had one of those weeks where technology just is not your friend and wants to fight you every step of the way. But that's what happened. So I'm going to do an in-depth review of episode 6 today, but I do want to briefly touch on episode 5 because, quite frankly, I think episode 5 is the best episode of the series, and that includes today's episode. So episode 5, definitely the most action-packed episode. We got some pretty good lightsaber fights, I think. A few shocking deaths, and by the way, spoilers ahoy already. The death of Yord and Jecki, as well as a lot of kind of red shirt nobody Jedis who we were, never introduced to. And then we got, the quote unquote reveal that Khmer was indeed the villain. I say quote unquote because, a lot of people were predicting that from the moment he was introduced, and of course that ends up being correct. I still suspect there's going to be some other evil, ahead of him, but we'll see. Actually, you know what? For a while, I thought maybe that would be Vernestra, but then I saw someone online said that she, the younger version of her, was the star of a Star Wars High Republic comic book, and she was the hero of that story. And when they said that, I think I actually read that story, and it totally escaped my mind. I mean, not that people don't turn to the dark side, which is something we'll be talking about today, but it makes me think that Vernestra probably is not going to be revealed as a villain. So yeah, this series has been all over the place. The first couple episodes I said, 6.5 out of 10. They were okay, but needed some improvement. Episodes 3 and 4 I thought were kind of pretty mid, probably more out of 5 out of 10. Episode 5, I would actually say, closer to a 7, maybe somewhere between a 6.5 and 7 out of 10. Which brings us to the episode we're talking about today, episode 6, which I would probably put at about a 6 out of 10. It's okay, very dialogue heavy episode. Some of it not too exciting, but I think a few interesting developments. Namely, that it seems they're teasing something. I guess in wrestling terms, you would call this a double turn, where is it possible that Osha will take a heel turn and May will be redeemed in some way and take, a babyface turn? They're teasing that in this episode. Actually, it's interesting. I ultimately don't think it will go that way, and I'm not even sure I want it to go that way. I actually think it would be more interesting if May and Osha kind of came to the realization that both the Jedi and the Sith are wrong, and maybe they create their own, not necessarily coven, because they used to but their own sect of Force users. I think that would maybe be cool. But then that leads to the question is if that happened, have they, been in hiding or were they destroyed, when it comes to later down the line Star Wars properties? I don't know. I just think that could be a interesting narrative way to go. So yeah, let's get into it. So episode 6, they went back to the kind of binary episode naming convention. This episode is called Teach/Corrupt. And actually, episodes 4 and 5 they split because 4 was day and 5 was night. So they still kind of did it, but they broke from what they were doing in the first couple episodes. Not that that's important at all. Okay. So Osha wakes up in a cave and finds that her wounds that she received in the last episode have been bandaged. She finds May's clothing and knife. So, I mean, I guess she's probably, since she's in different clothing and she finds May's clothing, maybe she's put it together in her head that May is posing as her. It's unclear. So she walks outside and she discovers that she's on this island. So, she thinks she's trapped. She goes out on the beach and she can see Khmer walking in the distance. So now we go over to Kofar. Sol is exiting the planet. He flies off. He's trying to notify somebody on Coruscant what happened, that his whole team is dead, but the transmission is not coming in. There's a communications problem. So May, who is disguised as Osha, something struck me as a little bit odd. So towards the end of episode 5, May cut her hair with a lightsaber. I'm assuming to look more like Osha, but I was watching the recap before this episode, and I'm like, man, I'm just not I guess super notice small details, because I'm like, I thought their hair was pretty much exactly the same anyway. And then also, as we know, she has somewhere on her forehead that witch mark that she got as a child. So I'm like, it's kind of dangerous for her to get her hair too short, but whatever. I guess she looked more like May. So yeah, May disguised as Osha. She remembers taking the Jedi test, where they asked her to kind of divine the hidden images, the Ghostbusters test, and I wasn't sure what the significance of her kind of in her mind remembering that was. I was like, thematically, it doesn't seem to have any tie to what's going on here, but maybe it does. Maybe I'm not looking deep enough. We see that that Basil, little rodent character, he continues to smell, that something's not right. Again, that character I find is a little annoying, but he's a comic relief character that isn't very funny, but whatever. So May enters the cockpit where Sol is still trying to explain on the radio that they were ambushed. She gets out her knife, they tease, is she going to stab him? Of course, that's not going to happen, because Sol senses that she's there and asks her to take the wheel while he goes off to the communications room. So he goes off to the communications room, and we see him kind of start to break down a little. He doesn't totally cry or anything, but we can see that everything is weighing heavily on him. But he exits that room, and then Basil enters the room with Pip in hand. Towards the end of episode 5, we saw, Khmer. He got picked up by those flying creatures. Eventually, he fell back to the ground, and we saw Basil get Pip and run off with him. So he takes Pip in, and he does what he needs to do to fix Pip at a workbench. So now we're back on the beach. Osha follows Khmer to the beach, where he ends up going skinny dipping. So anyone who's got the hots for Khmer, this is the episode for you. We also see that he has huge scars on his back. She takes his lightsaber, and also we can definitely tell that he knows that she's there, although they'll kind of reveal it here, and we're supposed to act surprised, even though I think almost anybody watching would have known. But she takes his lightsaber, and he asks how it feels, because of course he knew she was there all along. She tells him not to move, and he replies, "Feels good, doesn't it?" The lightsaber in her hand. To hold one in your hand again. He says that he assumes she didn't keep her own saber when she left the Jedi Order. He comments that her stance is good, but maybe keep the elbow up; it'll make you block better. She tells him to stay where he is, but he says if she's not going to join him, that he'd like to put his clothes back on. So he gets out and gets dressed. He says that he's wondering, or he says she's wondering if it's honorable to kill him, while he's vulnerable like this. He says, heat of battle, it's justified. But a few hours later, it's vengeance. He says now she's wondering how he can read her mind. He says that he can't, but that her anger betrays her thoughts. She asks why he brought her there instead of killing her. She asks if she's supposed to be his prisoner. And he's like, well, you're the one with the weapon. She asks if he killed Sol. He says no. She asks if he killed May. He says no, but that he finds it interesting that she would ask about Sol first before her sister. He says that Sol taught her the Jedi arts, but that he's more than that to her. He says that it's a special relationship, master and pupil. He walks away and allows her to keep the lightsaber. So now we're back on the ship. May, once again posing as Osha, tells Sol that they're all set. He gives her a big hug and says that she saved them all, because of course he thinks she's Osha. He says that she saved him. And he says Kamir corrupted her sister and pushed him to a bad place. He says that he's sorry and it's time to make things right. He says that it is time for him to face the High Council and tell them everything. I mean, they keep teasing, even out of the end of this episode of the Silver thing, that Sol has some deep, dark secret that he did. I mean, but in the flashback episode 3, I mean, we kind of already saw how that played out. So, I'm curious, if they can truly give us something that makes us go, oh, wow, he really is more morally complicated than we thought. Because I thought they were going to do that with that Torben guy that that drank the poison. And it's oh, that's all he did? Not much? But he felt guilty enough to drink poison? I mean, I never really bought that, but okay. So I don't know. We'll see if they truly do anything interesting with the Sol character. At that moment, they are interrupted by someone from Coruscant on a holoprojector that says they are now clear for transmission. But then all of a sudden, the power goes out. And Sol asks her to take a look because, again, he thinks she's Osha, and Osha, I guess, has, experience with communications or whatever. Because she's like a mechanic instead of a mechanic. So she's like, yeah, and asks him to give her a couple minutes. So now we get back on, I guess it's Coruscant, with some time for the political part of the episode. So a council member tells Venestra that his colleagues in the expansion region will vote in favor of an external review of the Jedi Order. She says Rayancourt, who is apparently a senator, has never been a friend of the Jedi. She worries that his fear has convinced so many. He says that this guy she's talking to says that a review should not be cause for alarm and that the Jedi are always transparent with the Senate. He says that this is a case of an ambitious senator grasping for power. I feel like, Star Wars has experience with injecting like these political angles, which I'm fine with, but I don't think they've ever truly made it all that interesting or intriguing. So I'm hoping, I mean, because that's one of the big things actually people complain about with the prequels is like it's all like the trade route stuff, and then they have a bunch of like the Senate stuff, but none of it's truly all that interesting. So, we'll see. She is interrupted by another Jedi named Mog, who tells her that they received a distress call from Master Soul. He tells her that the connection was faulty, but it sounds like the entire team was killed. Vanessa tells him to get Soul back on the comms, and he says that they tried, but they can't. She says to prepare a rescue team, and they will depart for the planet Kofar immediately, because she's. I think he asked like, "How do you know he's there?" And she's like, "Because I sent him." So back to the beach planet. Osha says that Kamir speaks as though he was a Jedi, and he replies that he was a long time ago. She says that she's never heard of him, and he says it was a really long time ago. Now, here's the thing. Unless he's somehow using the Force to extend his age, aren't these guys, similar in age? It seems like they would have almost been, Jedi younglings at around the same time. Maybe we'll find out that is a connection or something. I don't know. But, I don't know. If he's older than her at all, it's not by very much. She asked him why he brought her there. And he asked, "Why do you think?" And she's like, "For leverage?" He says, "Well, everyone does seem to want you." She says that if he keeps her there, Soul will come for her. She says that he has found her before, and his strength in the Force is very powerful. Kamir replies that it's not his strength in the Force, that it is hers. He says that someone ought to teach her that. So, he's basically this whole time has kind of been playing to get her to train under him. He says that she should start swimming if she wants to make it to the ship before sundown, or she could wait for the tide to go out. He then asked if she's hungry, and then she notices the ship. I thought this was weird. She notices the ship, and it's actually not that far away. And I'm like, did she not notice the ship before? And to be honest, it wouldn't be like the water is coming in, the tide is coming in at a pretty good pace. So maybe it would be unsafe to go out at the moment. But I don't think it would even take her very long to swim out to the ship if she wanted to. So back on the other ship, May goes into the comms room and finds Pip. She's then confronted and attacked by Basil. They kind of try to play this for small laughs. He basically grabs her leg, ends up stomping on her foot and running off. And then Pip sprays this weird black ink in her eye. Again, somehow Pip, even though he's tiny, he holds a fire extinguisher, all this fluid and stuff. I don't know how Pip does it, but he's definitely a multi too. So she grabs Pip and she resets him to factory settings. She asks him to run a check on the power system. Back over to Osha. Osha asks Kamir what he meant by strength in the Force, and he says exactly that. She says if he were a Jedi, he would know it's something you must exercise, that without training, it fades. He says that's what they told her. He says that the Jedi teach that there's only one way to access the Force, and if you don't do it their way, it fades. He says that there is another way. He says below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions: anger, fear, loss, and desire. She says that path leads to the dark side. This touches on something I have always hated about the Jedi Order. It's also one of the reasons, like, I've always kind of hated Yoda as a character, because he's such a buzzkill. Oh, that leads to fear, which leads to the dark side. Oh, you can't do that. That leads to desire, which leads to the dark side. And it's like, it makes it seem very clear that, like, the Jedi Order is asking people to give up, personal connections, which it would seem like they would need to actually be like a decent person. So there's always been, I think, I've always wanted to see the story where the Jedi are forced to come to terms with, they have to let some of that stuff in and, like, not turn to the dark side. You know what I mean? They have, it's just like the whole thing where, like, priests taking vows of celibacy doesn't work and it leads to horrific things. I want to see the story where the Jedi learn that, like, they have to change. You know what I mean? So yeah, she says that path leads to the dark side. And he's like, that's just semantics. She says that he murdered her friends, and he says that he killed Jedi. He says he killed those who threatened his existence. She says he killed Jord. He says he was a man who didn't hesitate to turn you in for a crime you didn't commit. She says you killed Jackie. He says, where did you think that was going to go? He says she would have had the same relationship with her that he has with her master, a one-sided relationship. Although, isn't that kind of every, like, Sith apprentice or acolyte relationship you see? It's also the same thing. It's very one-sided, like, Palpatine and Vader. He asked, by the way, I'm curious if any, because I'm not like a hardcore Star Wars nerd. I know something, but certainly not as much as a lot of people do. In the last episode, when Sol and Kamir are fighting, at one point Sol's like, what are you? And he's like, some of you would probably refer to me as Sith. And so I was like, okay, have Sith existed? So that's like a known term? Or is he just like, is that the birth of the word Sith that he's like, you may call me Sith? You know what I mean? I was like, where does, in the Star Wars universe, where does the term Sith actually derive from? So if anyone can answer me that in the comments, I would appreciate it. He asked why she loves people who can only go so far and not as deep as she can. She says that she's not her sister and is not as easily corrupted. Osha begins to leave the cave, and he says, aren't you forgetting something? He says she stayed there to do something and asked her to do it. And he puts, or she puts the lightsaber to his chest. And, he's giving her that opening to kill him. He tells her to turn it on, and she says a Jedi does not attack the unarmed. He asks her why she still thinks of herself as a Jedi. He says they didn't want her, and she says that's not true. She says she left because she chose to, and he asks if she's sure about that. She asks him to let her go. He says what she's feeling right now, this anger, this pain, is who she is. He says the Jedi saw that, and that's why they threw her away. She says they didn't throw her away. And he asked, why isn't she a Jedi? And she yells, because I failed. And then, that gets her angry, and she puts the lightsaber up to his throat. He says he understands and that he lost everything. He says, but when you lose everything, that's when you're finally free. She puts the lightsaber down, and then it cuts over to Vanestra. So Vanestra tells Mog that she's coming along on the rescue mission. And then it cuts now to May. May tells Sol that she had to restart the system, but it should be ready in 5 minutes. She asks Sol what's wrong with him. He asks how he couldn't have sensed that the villains the villain's true intentions when they first met Khmer on Olega. She says, when you really want something, it can cloud your mind. That you see what you want to see. Of course, I guess this is a sense of irony because she's not seeing, that she's basically doing the same thing. She's clouded because she's on this path of vengeance. And she only sees, the bad in the Jedi. She says that Khmer fooled them all. Sol notices that she found Pip. He says he notices the way she loves him, even though he's only a machine. She says that she's always been like that, even when she was little. In essence, kind of reminiscing about her memories of Osha when they were kids. She says that she had to lose a lot of herself in order to become a Jedi, even if she didn't know it at the time. He says that he's sorry if she felt that way. She asks how she could have possibly felt any other way. She asked if he told her everything that happened on Brindok when she was a kid. He says that she was very young, and she replies, but I'm not now, and that he can tell her what happened. At that moment, the power comes back on, so May goes to the cockpit radio and asks if anyone can hear her. The person on the radio asks her to identify herself, but before she can respond, she is knocked unconscious. And Sol is behind her. He shot her with the stun blaster that they've been using in the series. And then Basil appears behind him, and he realizes now that it's May. The question is, did he realize that from something she said, or did Basil tell her? It doesn't clearly say. I think it's more interesting if he sensed it in some way. So the radio says that the rescue team is on the way, so leave your transponder on. But then we immediately see Sol flip a switch, and I'm not sure if we're supposed to believe that he shut off the transponder. That's what I'm guessing we were kind of supposed to surmise, but it's not 100% clear. So Vanestra lands on Kofar. Mog says that the colony of flying creatures that we saw the last couple episodes that hatched might explain the casualties. Vanestra says that it could be, but seemingly it doesn't seem that she believes that. So they begin to walk towards the Kofar forest. Back on the island planet, inside the cave, Khmer repairs his helmet. Osha asks if he gave the same pitch to her sister as he's been given to her. He says that he made a mistake with May. He thought she wanted what he wants, but she really just wanted revenge and nothing more. Osha asks what he wants. He replies, the power of two. Which I do know that that's a thing in Star Wars, the rule of two. There always must be a master and an apprentice. She asks where he got the large scar on his back, and he says, how do you think I got it? Which, by the way, a lot of the dialogue like that in this episode, where she'll ask a question and he'll just how do you think, blah, blah, blah. She says it looks like someone stabbed him in the back. He says someone who threw him away did it. She asked, was it your Jedi Master? And he doesn't answer. Instead, he kind of knocks on his helmet and he says, the helmet is made of cortosis, which is handy against lightsabers. Which, by the way, another thing, episode 5, it's revealed that this helmet that he wears also makes it so the Jedi cannot read his mind. So in essence, it's basically like a Magneto helmet, which is... here's the thing, like, I'm not offended by that, but it's another thing where it goes, then why the hell aren't the bad guys in the future just, wantonly using that technology? You know what I mean? That's always the trouble you get in with prequels, when you got to be careful what you introduce, because does it then make you go, well, why weren't they doing that? And this is just another one of those things where I'm like, it's kind of cool, but it does kind of undercut the villains of the future. He says it's also a sensory deprivation headpiece like they use as younglings. He says it blocks out your senses, so it's just you and the Force and what you bring with you. He asks her to try it on, and she says that she does not trust him to do that. He says that she shouldn't trust him, but she should learn to trust herself. So back on Kofar, Vernestra finds the dead Jedi. Mog notes that Osha and May must have survived because they're not there. Vernestra asks what he sees, and he replies, an explosion, then a battle. One versus many. His power extraordinary, his skills erratic. His sole aim was to leave no survivors. At that point, one of the flying creatures shows up, and Vernestra kills it with her saber. She tells Mog that they were all killed by a lightsaber and asks what that tells him. He says that a powerful Jedi has fallen. He asks if she thinks that Master Soul was responsible. She says that is quite the accusation, and he replies, who else would possess the power to slay such a strong group? Now that's interesting, because obviously Vernestra knows that there's, a villain out there. But do the other Jedi, do they believe that, it's just them? Do they not believe that there's, villainous Force users out there? I'm not sure how that, why he would, instantly suspect Soul of, turning. So yeah, he says, who else would have the power to slay such a strong group? And she replies, something to tip the scales, which I know is a line she used in a previous episode as well. He asked if he did this why would he send a distress signal? Which is another good point. She says that it's time to get back to the ship, and they should prepare the bodies for burial. So now back to May. May wakes up in restraints. Soul tells her that he has no intentions of harming her. She asks him to let her go, and he says he will, but they have a lot to do. He says they need to find her master and save Osha. He says, but first they are going to have a talk. He says that he's had 16 years to think about what he would say if he ever got the opportunity. So she's going to listen to him. And then finally, back on the island planet, Osha looks at Kimir's helmet for a long time, puts it on, does some heavy breathing, and we fade to the credits. So again, this episode, not nearly as exciting or good as episode 5, in my opinion. But some interesting developments with, will Osha, become an acolyte of Kimir? Will May turn to the good side and be redeemed. Again, I don't necessarily suspect that OSHA is going to turn to the dark side. So where does that leave us in the next episode? So I'm thinking next episode we'll finally, get Soul's story, what exactly he did that was so bad. I'm thinking at some point they have to give Kamir maybe a little more backstory as well. Maybe we'll find out who indeed sliced him up. But it is pacing wise, I'm getting to where I'm like, can they end this in a satisfactory way? With just a couple more episodes to go. I'm a little dubious, but hey, fingers crossed. I would love to see this go from a mid series to something truly interesting. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys think. Going back to episode 5 a little, I did like the lightsaber choreography, but I will say I think we're yet to see how cool a lightsaber battle could be. I think of things like the John Wick franchise and the Raid movies and how intricate the fight choreography is. I'm just like, when are we going to get the lightsaber fight to end all lightsaber fights? It's basically the kitchen fight of the Raid 2 in lightsaber form. I think we very much need that. I want to see it. But anyway, that's episode 6 of The Acolyte. What did you guys think? Please comment below. Let me know. And like I said, let me know the origin of the word Sith in Star Wars canon. How old is that term? When did it truly originate? That's something I'm curious about. But yeah, that is going to do it. I thank you all for following along. Like I said, please comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. You can subscribe both on YouTube and in audio form on your podcast service of choice. Leave thumbs up, positive reviews, all that. If you like, you can follow me over on Twitter/X at Zach Jones Live. That's ZachJonesLive. But that'll do it for all my shenanigans and poppycock this week. Please tune in again next week. Bye, guys.